The wine was cheap. That was my first clue something was off. Marshall never poured anything under $100. Presentation mattered too much to him. But tonight, the labels were peeled off, the glasses mismatched, and his smugness dialed to 11. The bastard had planned something. I just hadn't figured out what. Yet, we were halfway through some bland roast when he leaned back, swirling his wine like some third-rate Bond villain, and said it. "This is James," he announced, gesturing to the man seated beside Gloria like he was unveiling a new Tesla. "He'll be replacing you, at work, and in her life." He said it with that patented Marshall smirk, the one he used when gutting startups in their series of rounds. Gloria didn't flinch. She didn't even blink. Just took another sip of her wine like we were discussing weekend plans, not detonating a marriage. James, for his part, nodded like he'd just been handed the keys to my office and my wife's bedroom in the same breath. And me? I just smiled. I turned my glass slowly in my fingers, leaned forward, and asked, "Does James know the company is mine? And about the prenup?" Clink. Gloria's fork slipped from her hand, hitting the porcelain with a sharp clang. The room went still. James looked confused. Marshall frowned like I just read the wrong script. I held their gaze and sipped my wine. That same wine I just insulted in my head. Didn't taste so bad now. Let me explain something. I didn't marry young. Didn't build my company with my father-in-law's money. I earned it each sleepless night, every spinal injection, every merger clause I rewrote at 2 a.m. Gloria came into the picture halfway through the second phase of expansion. She never asked about the paperwork. Marshall always assumed I needed him, needed them. I let them believe that for years. Let them parade around in country clubs while I kept the company alive through a pandemic, a recession, and 2 broken vertebrae. And now they were staging a coup. With James. James, who, by the way, hadn't said a single word yet. Just nodded like a bobblehead while the room cracked open beneath him. I folded my napkin. "If you'll excuse me," I said, rising. Marshall smirked again, as if I'd just conceded. Gloria didn't look up. James, still mute, probably running a mental checklist of what just happened and whether he should still show up Monday. I didn't slam the door, didn't make a scene. I got in my car, turned on classical radio, and drove home with both hands on the wheel and one thought in my head. This isn't betrayal. This is an audition for their own funeral. Now here's where most stories spiral into heartbreak or rage, or some limp confrontation in a therapist's office. But I'm not most men. I didn't yell. I didn't cry. I went into my study, locked the door, and opened the fireproof cabinet. Inside, the full prenup, signed by Gloria and notarized. The operating agreement with my holding entity clearly named. And a red folder labeled, "If they try something." I smiled. Not because I was winning yet, but because they were so damn sure they were. Also, while you're listening, more than 97% of you haven't subscribed. I get it, maybe you're just browsing. But if stories like this pull you in, hit that button. It motivates the team to keep digging deeper, crafting tighter, and pulling zero punches. All right, back to it. I picked up my phone and called Karen, my attorney of 18 years. She's sharp, lethal, and has a memory like a steel vault. "We're a go," I told her. Silence. Then, "We're unsealing?" I stared at the folder. "Oh yes, let's begin. Because here's the thing about a well-built trap. It doesn't snap shut until you're all the way inside." James was halfway in. Marshall was arrogantly pushing him further. Gloria? She thought she was driving the getaway car. But me? I was already on the other side of the chessboard. And my queen was still in play. The house was too quiet when I got back. That kind of sterile silence that doesn't belong in a place you've paid off twice over. Gloria had insisted on these beige walls, this minimalist furniture, the absence of anything that made a space mine. And now, it all looked like a waiting room for a man about to be evicted from his own life. I hung my coat in the hall like a ghost visiting a home that forgot it had a soul. The study door was already ajar. That door had a quiet habit of drifting open after her cleaning lady, accidentally, bumped it once too often. But not tonight. Tonight, I closed it behind me and locked it. I stood in the middle of the room for a moment, staring at the shelves. Every book on them had a reason. Every framed certificate, every photo from the company's first warehouse, even the brass globe from our original pitch deck. None of it was for show. It was memory, work, loss, and the kind of patience you only earn after watching people try to gut you slowly with smiles on their faces. Then I sat down at the desk and pulled out the drawer with the false bottom. Click. There it was, my real insurance policy. The folder was thick, heavier than I remembered. I slid it onto the desk next to the laminated prenup copy and the leather binder with the operating agreement. All three sat there like chess pieces waiting for a signal. And tonight they'd get one. I unlocked my phone and scrolled to K. Karen. No last name in the contact. No emoji hearts or little custom ringtone. Just K. She didn't need fanfare. She handled the ugly things most lawyers flinched at. The fine print. The clause you never notice until it claws you back. The unsealing instructions were in her hands. All she needed was my word. She picked up on the second ring. Daniel, I think it's time. She didn't ask what for. Karen wasn't the type to second-guess a man who'd waited 12 years to spring his own trap. Unsealing? Yes, all of it. Understood. Click. That was it. No drama. No begging. No teary-eyed, are you sure? Karen knew me too well for that. She'd been there when Marshall tried to wedge his way into my Series C round a decade ago, when Gloria subtly asked why she wasn't listed on the property deed to the lake house. Karen helped design this entire structure like an architect builds a bunker. Not flashy, but impossible to breach from the outside. I opened the folder labeled Holding Entity Transfers. Inside, a quiet masterpiece of legal misdirection. 12 years ago, just after our honeymoon, I sold 80% of my equity in the company to a holding entity I fully controlled. The sale price was public. The ownership details were not. Gloria had seen the wire transfer hit our account. She never asked where the money ended up. She was too busy showing off the beachfront rental Marshall booked for us as a wedding gift. Priorities, I suppose. That same entity held the deed to our vacation home, my patents, and every back-end platform licensing contract we had. Gloria had been bragging about her intuition for years. Turns out, her intuition stopped at paper trails and legal definitions. I flipped through the pages until I reached the one marked, Succession Pathway, Emergency Clause. That one had been added after the back surgery, during the year she stopped coming to doctor visits. It gave full executive authority, in the event of my incapacity or public absence, to a predefined successor. And guess what? It wasn't her. And sure as hell wasn't James. I could almost hear her voice from earlier that night. You're dragging this out. No, Gloria. You've mistaken silence for weakness. That was always your mistake. The prenup sat like a coiled snake, Clause 14 be tucked innocently in the third page. Simple wording, devastating effect. Any extramarital relationship results in full forfeiture of all spousal claims, including shared assets and retirement funds. She signed that clause on a Sunday morning, still wearing her robe, laughing at a reality show. I remember because she didn't even read it. I stared at the signature now. Her laughter echoed faintly in my head like a ghost of a woman who once believed she could never be replaced. And then I did something I hadn't done in weeks. I smiled, because all that rage from dinner, gone. It had no utility anymore. What I felt now wasn't fire, it was precision, controlled burn, strategic calm. They thought I'd storm out like a man whose pride was wounded. What they got was a man who was already 10 moves ahead and holding every receipt that mattered. The first email from Karen came at 2:08 a.m. Subject line, background, James S. Langford. No body text, just a zipped file, password protected, and a short postscript. You're going to love this. I opened it with the same giddy dread as cracking open a long-forgotten safe deposit box. And there it was, James, unfiltered. Not the smug, gel-haired substitute husband Marshall paraded like a prize bull, but the real man beneath the veneer. Spoiler alert, he was a walking liability in loafers. The first page was tame, LinkedIn resume, photos from a few charity dinners, standard puffery. But then came the juice. 2 quiet lawsuits filed by former employers, both settled under sealed arbitration. The language was classic corporate sanitization, breach of fiduciary responsibility, and misrepresentation of qualifications. Translation. This clown either lied, stole, or both. Karen flagged one particularly buried clause from a dismissed harassment complaint. A female subordinate claimed James made suggestive comments during off-site meetings. No formal charges were filed, but the HR deposition revealed he had a habit of offering mentorship opportunities in hotel lounges. I could practically hear Gloria defending him. That doesn't prove anything. She was probably just bitter, right? And I'm just paranoid. But it got better. 5 years ago, James filed for bankruptcy. That one was sealed tight. Karen had to lean on some of her more creative connections to even find a mention of it. The court docket showed asset forfeiture, defaulted business loans, and something about a failed crypto trading firm he tried to spin up post-bankruptcy. Classic Phoenix complex. Burn everything down and pretend the ashes were part of the plan. And then, my favorite part. 3 weeks ago, James applied for a $200,000 personal loan from a second-tier private lender. Collateral listed as expected employment income, executive role, Matthews Strategic Solutions. Matthews Strategic Solutions. My company. He'd already filled in the blank before the ink was dry. Filed it as a confirmed opportunity. Even dropped my name in the references. Karen called me the next morning, voice thick with amusement. You're replacing yourself with a man who can't qualify for a car lease. I chuckled. No, Karen. I'm giving him a title, not power. She laughed so hard she choked on her coffee. You're evil. I leaned back in my chair, flipping through the last few pages of James' financial wreckage. No, I'm patient. Because you see, titles are cheap. Anyone can be a VP of something these days. I could call him Lord Commander of Synergy, and it wouldn't change the fact that he's a broke fraud with a LinkedIn addiction and the strategic depth of a puddle. What he wanted was leverage. Access. He thought walking in next to Gloria meant he had both. I had other plans. Karen and I drafted an internal memo that morning. Position to be created, VP of Business Integration. Sounds impressive, right? The kind of title that earns you nods at hotel bars and free drinks from guys trying to sell you software. The kind of thing James would cling to like a lifeboat. We added the fine print. No direct reports, no budget approval, no proprietary access. The email would be dummy flagged. Anything he typed, clicked, downloaded, or forwarded would be logged in a secure sandbox. His badge would work, but only in public zones. He wouldn't even have access to the kitchen unless someone escorted him. Gloria, no doubt, had been whispering in his ear about how soft I'd become. How I was ready to let go. She probably told him I was already phasing out and just needed a gentle push. Maybe she believed that too. Let them. The key to a good trap isn't the bait. It's letting your mark believe he's already escaped the cage. I closed the file and set it aside. There would be no warnings. No confrontations. I didn't need James to know I knew. I needed him to feel safe, comfortable, confident enough to start leaving footprints in every system he didn't realize was logging his every keystroke. And when the day came, when the folder labeled Digital Audit James Langford landed on HR's desk, Gloria would finally understand. I didn't lose her to James. I handed her James like a gift-wrapped grenade. James showed up like it was his coronation. Monday, 8:14 a.m. sharp. Navy blazer, white button down a shade too tight at the chest. No tie, just enough executive chill to suggest he thought he already owned the place. He smiled too big, waved too hard, and dropped names like he'd studied the org chart the night before like flashcards. Gloria was glued to his side, practically glowing. I imagine she practiced her little tour speech in the mirror that morning. And this is where we'll be making changes. That kind of thing. She led him past reception with the confidence of someone who assumed everyone had been pre-warned, pre-approved, pre-humbled. They weren't. Reception looked up like they'd just seen a ghost. James smiled. James Langford, VP of Business Integration. The receptionist blinked. Oh, let me check something. Strike one. They had to wait 10 minutes for someone from facilities to bring him a badge. Generic. No photo. Labeled, Temp, Guest Access. James took it with a grin that said no big deal, just a hiccup. Gloria didn't grin. She led him upstairs, talking fast, waving her hand like a magician trying to distract from a missing rabbit. Introduced him to a few team leads, people I'd already briefed, people who knew exactly who he was and why this entire charade was being documented from the moment he stepped inside. He was escorted to a desk in the far corner of the bullpen. No office, no nameplate, just a pre-configured laptop with zero back-end access, a recycled mouse, and a desk phone that didn't dial out. He opened the laptop. Password prompt. He tried the one Gloria gave him. Access denied. He tried resetting it. Unauthorized. He called IT. Hi, this is James Langford, VP. The tech cut him off. Sorry, we're only authorized to take requests from department heads or the executive office. You'll need to go through your supervisor. James paused. Who's my supervisor? Silence. Strike two. Throughout the day, James wandered the halls trying to make himself useful. Tried to insert himself into a budget meeting, was politely asked to leave. Tried to get coffee in the executive break room, badge denied. Tried logging into shared drives, permissions blocked. He even tried calling the vendor I knew he'd pitch some synergy play to. The vendor emailed me directly 2 hours later. Who is this guy? Gloria said he's replacing you? Should we be worried? By 2 p.m., he was sitting at his desk clicking through Excel templates like a confused intern. Gloria brought him a cappuccino and leaned down, whispering too loudly, "Don't worry, baby, they'll warm up." Oh, they were warm, just not for him. Around 3:47 p.m., Gloria finally broke. She called me. "You busy?" she asked, her tone already tight. "Just stepping out of a meeting," I said, which wasn't true. I was home, in sweatpants, watching her fumble on the security feed with the same energy one watches a lioness realize the gazelle has a grenade. James says none of his systems are working. He can't get into anything. I waited a beat. That's correct. Why? Because he doesn't work here. She laughed. It was fake. Thin. A little too sharp. Come on, Daniel. Be serious. I am. He doesn't have an employment contract, Gloria. No board appointment. No HR onboarding. No authorization. You walked him in like a guest speaker. She went quiet. I could hear James in the background. Something about an integration strategy session. And how, this isn't how transition leadership works. Gloria, I said, voice low, you gave a stranger keys to a building you've never owned. And now you're shocked the doors won't open. More silence. Then, you're being petty. No, I said. I'm being precise. And I hung up. Across the office, employees whispered. Screens were being screenshot. Slack threads buzzed with euphemisms and GIFs. HR had already begun compiling the logs. James sat frozen at his borrowed desk. Gloria stood beside him, trying to explain it away to nobody in particular. But the looks she got weren't curiosity anymore. They were pity, because something wasn't adding up. The man she paraded in like a prince couldn't even log into payroll. The queen had moved her pawn, but the king hadn't left the board. Karen's office had always smelled like wood polish and quiet vengeance. No wall art. No diplomas hanging like ego trophies. Just one tall window, a worn mahogany desk, and a lawyer who never smiled unless someone else was about to regret something. She was waiting with the draft packet already open, glasses low on her nose. Vanity title approved by the board, she said without greeting. They signed off as long as we keep the employment file empty. I nodded. Good. No contract. Nothing to revoke. Exactly. He'll be an accessory, not an employee. I scanned the documents in front of me. His new title would be printed on glossy paper and handed to him with all the pomp of a real promotion. Vice President of Business Integration. It sounded sleek, official, even powerful to someone who didn't know the architecture of the company. But legally, it was a sticker on a wet cardboard box. No decision-making rights, I confirmed. No authority, Karen echoed. No budget. No department. And no desk in the executive wing, I added, smiling. Let's keep him orbiting the core, just far enough to feel relevant. Karen tapped the final page. We'll assign him a project portal. Custom access. Mirrors a live environment, but it's a recording sandbox. Everything he touches, emails, drafts, edits, gets logged. Nothing leaves that server without tripping 3 firewalls. Will he know? She arched an eyebrow. You hired me to build the trap, Daniel. Not to advertise it. I signed the last page and she closed the folder with a soft thud. The sound of quiet war drums. That afternoon, IT configured the limited access sandbox under the code name Echo Staging. It looked identical to our real infrastructure, but every API, file path, and endpoint was a controlled illusion. Think of it like a dollhouse for corporate espionage, except every wall had a mic and every drawer a pressure sensor. I personally oversaw the dummy email alias tied to his badge. j.langford.integration@msglobal.biz. Harmless. Air-gapped. Anything he sent would land in an internal review queue first. HR was briefed. Compliance was told to stay flexible. Legal? Already licking their chops. The bait was officially in place. James received the email at 6:12 p.m. Welcome aboard, Vice President Langford. It chirped. Attached. A PDF with executive responsibilities, written in large bold font, beneath which sat several hundred words of absolutely nothing. No measurable objectives. No KPIs. Just enough buzzwords to massage his ego. Synergy, optimization, alignment initiatives. Gloria forwarded it to 3 of her friends within the hour. One of them replied, "Proud of you guys. You deserve to build something together." "Sure. Let's build a coffin for your boyfriend's career first." Tuesday morning, James walked back in like a man who thought the glitch from Monday was over. He had the badge, the title, the email. Gloria even left him a new notepad and fancy pen on the same temporary desk. He opened his laptop and logged into the Sandbox server. It worked. He relaxed. And that's when I knew the trap was working. By noon, he'd fired off emails about streamlining departmental strategies to people who didn't report to him, drafted a 7-page memo on new outreach protocols copied verbatim from some consultant's blog post, tried to schedule a meeting with procurement. They never replied. He was busy, though so busy. Karen and I watched every keystroke in real time. Each email a thread, each click a breadcrumb. He was digging his own tunnel. All we had to do was let him think there was light at the end. At one point he pinged IT for help with software licensing. They responded with an auto-reply. "Your request has been logged. Expected resolution, 2027. I let that one through myself. I'll admit, there was something almost beautiful about it. James had just enough access to think he was building influence, but everything he touched was fake, ephemeral, and archived for review, like a child playing CEO in a sandbox rigged with explosives. Meanwhile, I met with our lead investor over lunch and updated him personally. "Does he suspect?" he asked. I shook my head. "He thinks I'm retiring." The investor laughed. "This is the most fun I've had all quarter." I raised my glass. "To strategic miscommunication." And under the table, my phone buzzed with a message from Karen. "He just tried sending a memo to legal." Perfect. Let him build. Let him plan. Let him pitch dreams to a boardroom that will never hear him. Because when the trap finally snaps shut, it'll be his own fingerprints that sealed the cage. She waited until Sunday morning. Of course she did. I was in the kitchen, making eggs the way she used to like them before she decided everything I cooked was too heavy. The kind of quiet domestic moment that used to mean something before it became theater. Gloria stood in the doorway in a silk robe she hadn't worn in months, sipping coffee from the mug I bought her last Christmas and pretending this was just another casual weekend. "You're dragging this out, Daniel?" she said, voice flat but rehearsed. "It's getting ridiculous. You know it's time." I didn't turn around. Let the eggs sizzle. Let her fill the silence. "You built something incredible," she added, stepping closer. "But you're stuck. And it's hurting everyone." "Everyone?" I repeated, as if tasting the word. She walked around the island, setting her mug down with a soft clink. "Let James lead. He's hungry. He's the future," I offered. She smiled, relieved I wasn't raising my voice. "Exactly. He respects what you've done. But it's time to pass the torch." I turned off the burner, slid the eggs onto a plate. "You're right," I said, handing her breakfast. "I'll make it official next week." She blinked, taken off guard. "Wait, really?" I nodded slowly, then took a long sip of my coffee. "That's what's best." And there it was, the softening, the exhale. She believed it. She thought she'd finally worn me down with passive-aggressive sighs, lukewarm affection, and thinly veiled ultimatums. Her entire posture shifted, less adversary, more victor. She leaned across the island, brushing her fingers against mine. "Thank you. I knew you'd do the right thing." I smiled. "Always." She didn't see the light on the printer behind me flicker green. In the adjacent room, the printer fed paper one sheet at a time with surgical precision. Page 1. A memo to the board officially announcing my transition, not to retirement but to chairman. A move that retained full control of strategic direction, voting authority, and oversight on all executive decisions. Page 2. An updated internal notice from HR reclassifying James' role from VP of Business Integration to Consultant, External Liaison. A nice way of saying, man, we can ignore legally. Page 3. A draft letter of separation for Gloria Matthews citing ethical conflict, nepotism concerns, and a clear breach of professional boundaries. It was clean, clinical, and HR approved. I took the freshly printed stack, placed it in a black envelope with gold trim, her favorite kind, ironically, and sealed it shut. No drama, no ribbon, just consequence waiting for the right moment. Later that evening, Gloria hummed around the house. The good mood was thick. She poured wine, lit candles, Even queued up an old jazz playlist on the sound system like we were rekindling something. I watched her from the couch, nodding along, listening to her list travel plans she and James had talked about. Europe, maybe Belize. She didn't even notice the envelope tucked into the side pocket of my briefcase. She talked about James like a project, a startup she was backing, polishing, prepping for IPO. I think he's really coming into his own, she said, swirling her Pinot. People are starting to see it too. Even Karen seemed less cold when she passed him in the hall. I raised an eyebrow. Karen spoke to him? Well, not spoke exactly, she backpedaled. But she didn't glare. Progress. She walked over, set her glass down next to mine. I think this is good for all of us. It is, I agreed. She leaned in. It feels lighter. I nodded, eyes on hers. It will. Soon. She kissed me then on the cheek, like a woman sealing a deal, not showing affection. Then she walked upstairs humming that same fake happy tune. I sat still a moment longer, then stood, walked over to the briefcase, and gently pressed the envelope flat inside. Let her sleep. Let her dream about Europe. Because next week, when the memo lands on the boardroom table, and James sees consultant stamped next to his name, and HR asks Gloria to collect her things, there won't be arguments. No tantrums. No screaming match in the parking lot. Just a quiet removal. A surgical extraction of 2 parasites from a company I'd built with blood and bone. She thought she won. That's the thing about manipulation, you only think you're winning because you don't realize the other person already walked off with the crown. The boardroom was already half full when James swaggered in. Portfolio under his arm like he'd just been personally invited to ring the NASDAQ bell. Fresh haircut, new watch. Probably something Gloria bought to make him feel established. She trailed behind him in a navy pantsuit, whispering in his ear like a campaign manager prepping her golden boy for his first debate. He smiled and greeted each board member with an outstretched hand and a great to finally connect. Most of them offered polite nods, though a few glanced at each other, subtle, unreadable. He set up his laptop at the far end of the table, arranging his presentation remote and notes with a nervous precision. Gloria placed a printed copy of their 5-year plan at each seat, stapled and branded with the company logo she had no legal right to use. Then the door opened. I stepped in, calm as ever, wearing the same tailored gray suit she once called funeral fabric. Seemed fitting. The lead investor followed, nodding once toward the head of legal already seated near the center. James froze mid-slide preview. Gloria's face stiffened. Smile held just a second too long. I didn't sit. The head of legal cleared his throat, flipped a thick black folder open, and spoke without preamble. Before we begin, we've been asked to review a revised agenda. Hard copies are being distributed now. Folders slid across the table. Pages turned. Silence. Then, Agenda Item 1, Termination of Gloria Matthews. Effective immediately, per Clause 7.2. Breach of internal ethics and unauthorized executive conduct. Someone exhaled sharply. Another leaned back, arms crossed. James laughed once, short, disbelieving. Wait, what? Gloria's voice cracked for the first time in weeks. This is ridiculous. Daniel, what the hell is this? I looked at the investor beside me. He gave a tight smile and tilted his head toward legal. Item 2, the attorney continued, unbothered. Removal of unauthorized personnel from all company premises, with particular emphasis on individuals without valid employment contracts. James blinked. That can't mean. Mr. Langford, legal said smoothly. You have not been on board. You've received no formal offer, signed no documents, and your access has been entirely provisional. The board has voted unanimously to revoke all temporary permissions effective immediately. He started to stand, looking at Gloria. Tell them, Gloria. Tell them I'm leading the integration strategy. I've been working with procurement, You've been accessing a sandbox, I said flatly. Everything you touched was fake. Every email you sent was logged. Every plan you drafted, archived. Gloria shot up. This is a setup. I nodded. Yes, that's exactly what it is. James turned pale. You can't do this, you said. He caught himself, glancing around, realizing too late how loud he was becoming. You said I'd be brought on board. Gloria's voice was frantic now. He's trying to make us look unstable. You don't have the authority. I do, I interrupted. The board granted it last year when I updated the bylaws. Clause 4.3, A. In the event of executive misconduct or attempted internal restructure, the chair may act unilaterally pending a retroactive vote. That vote happened. Friday. The room was still. The only sound was the faint hum of the projector James had never gotten to use. I don't understand, he muttered again, his voice smaller now. We had a plan. No, I said. You had an illusion. The head of HR entered quietly and stood by the door. James turned toward her. You're not serious. You can't just throw people out. She looked at me. I nodded once. 2 security personnel appeared outside the glass doors. Not rushing, just waiting. Watching. Daniel, Gloria said, stepping forward. Her voice was lower now, calculated. This is cruel. Whatever you think I've done, we can fix it. We're still married. Not functionally, I said, pulling a black envelope from my briefcase and sliding it to legal. But that'll be addressed under a different clause. The head of legal opened the envelope, skimmed the first few lines, and gave a sharp nod. To be clear, he said, there is documented evidence of personal and professional misconduct. Additionally, per the prenup, such conduct results in full forfeiture of marital claims. James looked like he might vomit. Gloria went quiet, stone still. Her face tightened into a mask of contempt, but her eyes flickered. Fear, confusion, calculation, then nothing. I turned to the board. As of today, I'm assuming the role of chairman. I will not be retiring. The company's direction remains unchanged. What needed removal has been removed. Pause. Then the investor next to me offered the first slow clap. One by one, others followed. Polite, cold, precise, just like the plan. I turned and walked out without another word. Behind me, James stood frozen. Gloria clutched the edge of the table like it was the only thing keeping her upright. And the doors shut quietly behind them. I didn't hand her the folder right away. That would have been mercy. Instead, I waited until the last ripple of that boardroom upheaval had stilled, until the smug veneer had finally peeled off James' face, until Gloria's jaw clenched so tight I thought her molars might crack. Legal had just finished outlining the removal procedures. HR was on standby. The 2 security guards stood like bookends at the glass doors, neutral and silent, waiting for the cue. That's when I stood again and walked calmly to Gloria's end of the table. I set the folder down with 2 fingers. Black leather, embossed in silver, prenup enforcement. She didn't move at first, just stared at it like it might explode. Then, slowly, she opened it. Her eyes scanned the top page, Clause 14b, printed in bold. Engagement in an extramarital relationship nullifies all spousal claims, including but not limited to joint property, retirement benefits, profit sharing, and inheritance rights. Her mouth opened slightly. Page 2, 3 full-color surveillance photos, time-stamped, pulled directly from hotel lobby footage 3 cities over. Gloria laughing in a red coat. James's hand on her back. The timestamp? For days before she stood in our kitchen and said she was reconnecting with an old friend over drinks. She looked up at me, hands still resting on the folder. You had us followed? I shook my head once. No, you followed your own pattern. Same hotel chain. Same client meetings. You're not very original. The silence around the table was surgical. James leaned forward, trying to salvage whatever fragments of credibility still clung to him. Okay, look, this doesn't have to be personal. You're upset. I get it. But this is... I cut him off with a raised hand and a short laugh. James, you listed fake income projections on your loan application. You claim to be an incoming executive with equity shares and projected bonuses that don't exist. That's fraud. He paled instantly. What? No. I reached into my briefcase and pulled out a small USB drive, set it gently on the table like a chess piece sliding into checkmate. Here's your digital footprint, I said. Everything you accessed, everything you sent, every email you tried to BCC to vendors about positioning strategies. It's all archived. HR will explain how much severance you're not getting. He didn't reach for it, just stared at the drive like it had teeth. Gloria's voice was lower now, desperate but still dressed in dignity. You set this up. From the beginning. No, I said. You did. I just kept the receipts. She flipped back to the first page of the prenup, rereading the clause like it might change if she looked hard enough. Her lips moved silently, trying to formulate some counter, some rhetorical escape hatch. I leaned down so only she could hear me. I gave you every chance to walk away clean. You chose to drag your lover into my company and pretend it was a coup. But this isn't TV, Gloria. It's math. It's law. And you lost. I straightened and turned to the board. This concludes our agenda. The room held its breath. James made one final, pathetic attempt at standing. You can't just destroy two people like this. We had plans. I smiled at him. So did I. Gloria sat like a statue, the folder still open in front of her. One hand trembled slightly as it hovered over the photos, then recoiled. She looked smaller now, stripped of strategy, of posture, of entitlement. Just another paper soldier who marched into battle without reading the terms of engagement. The lead investor stood first, then legal, then HR. The last thing I heard as I walked out of the room was James whispering to Gloria, "Why didn't you tell me he had this kind of control?" Her reply, "He was supposed to be done." And that, I thought, is the difference between thinking someone's finished and not realizing they were just reloading. The door opened without sound. 2 security officers stepped in, uniformed, calm, clinical. No shouting, no radio chatter, just presence. James stiffened like he'd just felt a cold wind crawl down his spine. Gloria didn't move. She clutched the folder against her chest like it might reverse gravity if she held it tight enough. "Mr. Langford," one of the guards said with professional neutrality, "we'll need you to come with us." James stood, hands raised halfway like a man who knows better than to argue but still wants the world to know he's dignified. "I have things to collect. My laptop, my notes. They've already been archived," I said. "Nothing you worked on was real." He blinked. "Your access terminated 5 minutes ago. You were working in a sandbox. You sent memos to ghosts." The guards flanked him, guiding, not dragging him toward the door. He glanced over his shoulder at Gloria, who didn't even look at him. She stared at the folder still pressed to her ribs, the edge of the prenup enforcement document peeking out like a paper blade. The doors hissed shut behind him. For a long, silent moment, the boardroom held a breath it hadn't realized it was holding. I turned back to the table, a room full of people who'd been briefed in fragments. People who'd seen rumors, red flags, uneasy silences. Now they understood the architecture. "I'll be stepping back from day-to-day operations," I said, voice steady. "But not down. The company remains under my oversight. The strategic roadmap will be finalized by end of quarter. The noise is over. We're clean." Someone nodded. Another murmured, "Good." I felt their posture shift, from uncertainty to alignment, from wary silence to reinforced trust. I turned toward the door, and that's when Gloria spoke. For the first time since James was escorted out. "You didn't have to humiliate us." Her voice wasn't sharp anymore. No venom, just low, exhausted. Her eyes locked on mine. Not begging, not defiant. Just hollow. The kind of voice that doesn't ask for forgiveness, just for time to make sense of impact. I stepped closer, just enough for her to hear the answer without making it a show. "You tried to erase me." She flinched. "You didn't just cheat. You tried to rewrite me out of my own story." I held her gaze for a moment longer, then walked toward the boardroom exit. Behind me, the chair of the compensation committee stood. Then another, a quiet shuffle of respect. No clapping, just the clean sound of chairs pushed back in unison. And then the applause began. Not loud, not theatrical, just measured, certain. A standing ovation. I didn't slow my stride, didn't bask in it. Just walked through the parting silence like a man stepping into sunlight after a long winter. As I exited, I caught one last glance at Gloria, still seated, folder limp in her hands. The room no longer saw her. She wasn't the wife, wasn't the real strategist. Just a silhouette now, a ghost occupying a chair she once thought would be mine. But I had already reclaimed my place. Not with revenge, with removal. Clean, quiet, complete. The gravel crunched under Gloria's tires as she pulled into her father's estate. Not a home, an estate. The kind of place with wrought iron gates, an alley of sycamores, and a staff trained to look the other way when family business turned ugly. Tonight, the lights were already on. Marshall was waiting. He didn't let her reach the porch. "What the hell happened?" he barked, striding out in shirt sleeves. No tie, phone already in hand. "You were supposed to take control. Both of you. Do you have any idea what this is doing to the optics?" Gloria stepped out of the car slowly, still in the same wrinkled pantsuit from that morning. Her heels sank into the gravel. Her voice was hoarse. He blindsided us. He had everything ready. The prenup, the documents, HR. Don't give me excuses, Marshall snapped, already dialing. I want legal on this now. We'll freeze assets. Counterfile. Challenge the prenup, hell. I'll call that idiot judge from the Sandover case. Gloria followed him up the steps, exhausted. Dad, it's over. You don't get it. It was never just the prenup. He owns the company structure through holding entities. He's the board. We were guests. You were supposed to know that, he snarled. You told me he was soft, that he was fading. That James. I thought I knew him, she said, quieter now. I thought he'd roll over. Marshall turned, about to fire back, when the front door opened. His secretary stepped out, calm, composed, a small white envelope in hand. She didn't look at Gloria. She didn't look at Marshall. Just handed him the envelope and said, "This came by courier. No return address. Said it was for you directly." He snatched it like it might explode. Inside, a check, folded with precision. The amount? $2 million. Exactly the sum he loaned me 12 years ago, back when he strutted into my Series C pitch and offered a lifeline wrapped in condescension. Attached, a single sheet of paper. Letterhead clean. Font tight. Signature familiar. No Dear Marshall. Just the facts. Full repayment of private loan. Accrued interest as agreed. Final disbursement under informal advisory arrangement. Relationship concluded. And underneath that, in ink, handwritten, casual, sharp, you introduced me to James. I introduced you to consequences. Daniel. Marshall went silent. Dead silent. His fingers gripped the edges of the note, then the check, as if squeezing them could reverse the transaction. Behind him, Gloria sank onto the porch swing, paper folder still clutched in one hand like it might save her from drowning. For a long time, neither of them spoke. Inside, the estate phone rang twice, then stopped. Then again. The beginnings of a storm, not outside, but within, clients asking questions, investors second-guessing, silent partners sniffing blood. Because it wasn't just about Gloria. It was about judgment. Marshall's judgment. And Daniel had just made it public. Quietly, legally, devastatingly so. Somewhere else, far from that estate, from that porch, from those unraveling legacies. I sat in a different house. Smaller. Simpler. Mine. No staff. No drama. Just a fire. A glass of something dark. And the unshakable calm that follows a storm you engineered down to the last gust. No headlines. No press release. Just silence, exactly how I wanted it. And the grin I couldn't quite suppress as I looked out the window and whispered to no one in particular. Checkmate.